Now it's time to start putting these doors back together. This is a freshly painted car, so the door at the moment has no hardware on it, apart from this, which they haven't taken off, and these rod guides here. Very first thing you're going to want to put on is the door check stop mechanism, which is this thing here, which we've refurbished. Now if you're very lucky, you'll find that when you took it off, the pin came out. In our particular case, we had to cut the pins out. If you're even luckier, you'll find after the car's been painted that the pin still fits in there, but 9 times out of 10 there is paint in those holes, and what you'll have to do is get a drill bit or something like that to get the paint out of those holes before you could put the pin back in. Allen key or something like that to just clear out all the old paint from these holes, and eventually, after a lot of messing about, you might find that the pin actually starts to fit in there. We've still got a little way to go. The alternative would be to get a Dremel tool on a flexible shaft, which of course we don't have here when we really need it. But you can see this is just starting to go through there now. Make sure you put plenty of grease on these surfaces here, and also oil the runners here and here. This is just going to thread in through the door and hopefully through there, and then that hole should line up just there like so. Now that is held in by this Allen bolt and also a wave washer, which is on this side. That is just held on with this little fitting here. Now I mentioned in a previous video that if you have to drill your fitting out because it's rusted in there, which ours was, those little bolts cost £5 from Mercedes. So if you can avoid doing that, that is definitely the way forward. When you put this in, make sure you put that bolt in first. Now you can start it off with an Allen bit, but because of the angle, you're only going to be able to get so far with that, and then you're going to have to use an Allen key. It's very easy to, if you try and put that bolt in with a straight socket, it's very easy to cross the threads, so try and avoid doing that, because as I say, that's a very expensive bolt if you have to get another one from Mercedes. And once again, this bolt here is actually doesn't go in straight like that, it goes at an angle like that. If you try and put it in straight, you'll be messing around for ages trying to get the bolt in. Once you've got that in, you can then get set about tightening the Allen bolt and this one up. If you've got both of these bolts in the right place, you should in theory be able to put this pin in like this, probably not with one hand. Can be extremely difficult getting that pin in, but whatever you do, make sure you cover. If you've just got a freshly, even if you haven't got a freshly painted car and that pin's not going in easily, make sure that you've got something behind covering so you don't have any chance of chipping the paint if you miss with the hammer that you're using to tap that pin in. After you've managed to get the pin all the way in, this is the other car here, you need that special little clip washer on top of it to stop it dropping out. First thing we're going to put on the car is the strike plate. Now if you remember when this came off, it was very rusty and pitted, so we've put that in a rust bath, taken all the rust off, and then we've dusted it over with some MRO chrome galvanizing paint. Those strike plates are held on by Phillips countersunk machine screws, the M6. Now the ones we bought initially were too short because these screws should be 16mm and not 10mm, and when they measure this type of screw, they measure the total length of the screw and not just the thread, so make sure you don't make that mistake. These are M6 16mm. So the first piece of this whole door mechanism went on without any dramas. We're not tightening it up yet because we're going to have to line it up with the actual lock mechanism. Next bit to go on is the actual lock mechanism. We've oiled all of the lock mechanism, cleaned any rust off it, put this bit here in a rust bath. It was heavily pitted, you can still see it's the pitting there, and we've once again dusted that over with the MRO chrome galvanizing paint. Now that's held on by 4 raised head screws, so they're not flat, they're raised head screws. Once again, they should be 16mm and not 10mm. I've ordered these slightly short. I think machine screws are measured by the whole length, whereas fill pan screws are actually measured by the thread length. So raised head Phillips 16mm screws, 4 of them. And just to warn you, if you order these from Mercedes, they won't send you Phillips screws, they'll send you star bit screws. So I ordered a pack of these for this restoration, but they're not the same as what came off the car. They're star bits, just to warn you. Now that door mechanism screws into special fittings here and here, and if you've got a freshly painted car or freshly painted door and you're doing this, it's as well to either bend that open a little bit so when you put it in it doesn't scratch the paint, and definitely use some silicone grease or lube so it slides in there without simply scratching all the paint off. Next up, we're going to put this locking mechanism on. Now we've replaced all the screws. These are Phillips Fill Pan 16mm screws. Now I've noticed here that when they painted the car they never took the old clips out here. So what we will do is put the new ones in, because each one of these little special clips here we have de-rusted and oiled, etc. So I don't know what state these are in, we'll just replace them. I'm not a painter, I've never painted a car in my life, but if you're about to paint the car, my advice would be take the clips out before you paint the door, otherwise you'll get all of these bits here. Before you go ahead and screw this in, it's much easier if you put the rods in clips in first, so we're going to do that now. We've got moving parts like this, we're just putting a liberal spattering of grease on both the rod and the fitting. Now the way these clips go on, they fit through that fitting there, and then the rod goes through the hole, and once you've done all of that, you just clip that down like so, and that keeps it in place. Once again, make sure you've got plenty of grease and lube on there. It's easiest to put the top 2 in first and the bottom one last, as that bottom clip is held in place by gravity. I'm not going to tighten these all the way up just yet, just in case we need to make any final adjustments. Now you can then set about lining these rods up here into the little fitting, which once again was actually left on this car, so we have a spare one of those. Now what you want to do is just put a dab of grease on the rod around here, so that as it slides to that fitting it's got plenty of lubrication. We'll do that now. When you come to attach these rods, just remember that the top rod goes on top and the shorter rod on the lower hole and on the rear hole here. For the first time in about 20 years, that lock mechanism is working really smoothly. Everything is working as expected. We just need to see if the door lock closes now. Now we've closed this door now before we put the handle on, so in theory when we open that handle there, the door should open, which it does, so we can now go ahead and tighten up these screws on there and there. Everything lines up perfectly, and move on to the next thing, which is putting in the regulator and the rails. Next up, we're going to fit the door handle. Now that's held on by these 2 10mm M6 fill pan screws. We replaced both of them, and they're both going to need a washer as well. The way this goes on, it slides. That back screw there is not threaded all the way up, and this hooks in this way and then slides that way, and you can then tighten up that screw. You can adjust that screw so there's no movement. So that's a little bit sliding in all the way. I'm going to do that off camera to get that in so I don't scratch the paint. When you come to put these rails back in, this is the rail nearest the front. You're going to have to first put in that little clip into the wing mirror chrome, and then you're going to have to screw that on using a couple of countersunk, hopefully stainless steel or chrome machine screws. Once you've put those 2 little Phillips machine screws in, you should be able to just hook over the rubber piece. The rubber piece hooks over the top there and over the bottom here. You can still get these rubber pieces. We're not going to replace this one, and then you can put this rail on the car and it'll be bolted to the door through these 2 holes here. Next up, we're going to put this rail here in. the rail to which the mirror attaches. We've got new screws in there, new bolts, and tidied up the bolts at the bottom there. Those bolts at the bottom there, incidentally, is how you adjust the tilt of the window to get it to fit properly. Now, this, if you remember, slots in this way, and then you're going to have to twist it that way. When you come to bolt that on, you've got a nut at the back, then you want to put a washer on, and then you want to put the final nut on. It's a good idea when you take that fitting off that you mark the threads or take a photo so you get some idea of the how much of that bolt needs to go through that hole, otherwise your window tilt will be completely wrong. Up here we've got two short M6 bolts. These are 10mm ones with a washer, and those just bolt onto there. Next up, we're going to put the regulator in, and the regulator goes in this way through this hole here. I've adjusted it so that it's quite narrow and the edges don't get caught on here. There are 3 bolts that hold the window regulator to the door. These are M6 times 10mm bolts. Next, you're going to need a little 6mm spring washer, and then you're going to need a M6 flat washer. As I say, there's 3 of those that hold the regulator to the door. 1, 2, 3. Remember, in here there's 2 16mm bolts, and then there's just 3 shorter 10mm bolts holding the regulator in. A lot of work polishing, restoring all these bits, so once again we're using all the help we can get. Very nice. We finished gluing the rail onto the rubber strip, which in turn was glued onto the glass. I just need to go along and tidy that up with a scalpel, get rid of any excess glue stroke sealant, and this is exactly what we wanted to see. All of these little pinholes filled with sealant, which should help protect this in the future. We've cleaned up any excess glue as best we can. I'm just going to dust this over once with the golden cad, just to give it a little bit of more protection and make it slightly, not that you'll ever see this bit, but make it the same colour as the rest of the rods, etc. When you come to put the actual window glass in, you're going to use this section here to thread in the runners, because this is the widest section here and those runners will fit through there. So the way the window is going to go in is tilted at an angle. So I don't know how well this is going to come out on camera, but what we've got is the window regulator in place, and we've got the back rail in place, and we've taken this front rail out. And the way this fits in there, you're going to try and do this without scraping all the paint off, if at all possible, is you're going to thread this through there, like so. Once you've got the window roughly in, you're going to want to do this bolt up here loosely, just so that can't pop out. And then the next thing to do is just to line up these holes there and bolt the window regulators to the actual window glass. The window is attached with 4 bolts along the bottom here to these 2 rails. Now these bolts are the longer ones, the M6 16mm bolts, and once again there's a spring washer and a flat washer. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts, 4 spring washers, 4 flat washers, and on the end here you have these brackets. Now make sure you get the brackets the right way around. There's an edge that they sit against here and here. After you've put the glass in, you're going to slide in this rail here, and that attaches to the car with 2 Allen bolts. Now it's worth mentioning that those Allen bolts should have washers, and how many washers come off is how many should go back on, because those washers act as little shims. Now on this particular side there was 1 washer on each Allen bolt. On the other side there's 3 on the top and 2 on the bottom, and my advice would be, when you take it off, make a note of how many washers came off when you took it off and put the same number back on, and when you're putting them on, it's extremely easy to drop them down these little parts and very, very difficult to get them out again, so try and avoid doing that. When you've got these two Allen bolts in here and here, remember that the bottom hole is covered with a plastic cap, and the top hole up here is covered with the chrome piece that fits here. I should mention that these chrome pieces here on this outer rail, they are bonded on or glued on, so if yours has come off for any reason while you've been disassembling this, you need to glue that back on. It has been a momentous job taking each one of these rods and parts out of the rustiest 450 SL I've ever seen, restoring each part, painting them, renewing every single nut, bolt, washer, redoing all the locking system, repainting them, refurbishing each part. It's taken us weeks to do that. We've rebonded the window on, but I'm really happy with the way things have come out. It only remains to be seen now whether after 20 years this window mechanism actually works. We haven't fully adjusted it yet, but let's just see if it actually works and goes up, and it goes up super smoothly, I'm happy to say. We've still got to adjust all our stops and all of that kind of stuff, but we'll do that in another video or at another time. In the next video, I'm going to do the A-pillar trims. That'll help us align the window. I'm going to do these scraper seals. Once again, that'll help us align the window. And then we'll probably be moving on to the seats. These are non-SL seats. Need to take the seats out the other car, transplant them in this car, and then we will be moving on to the front of the car, the dashboard, rebuilding all the dash, and after that we'll be seeing if after however many years this car actually starts and runs.